Mr. Sikorski, good to see you on TV Rain. Always welcome. First of all, European partners of Ukraine have decided to hold sanctions against Russia because of the negotiations in Istanbul. Do you believe these negotiations will actually happen? Because I can see that Russian delegation will be headed by Mr. Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So what is going on? Is Putin going there? What do you think?
I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know either.
That's been set for the leadership of the Russian Federation. Ukraine had already agreed to an unconditional ceasefire over a month ago, and now agreed to direct talks. And we shall see whether the current leadership is serious about ending the war or is just using excuses to continue to try to achieve its original aims, which is the conquest of Ukraine.
Considering that you have just visited Ukraine, that you are very much involved in this situation, do you think that Vladimir Putin wants this 30-day ceasefire, that he is going to the deal, signing the deal?
He doesn't seem to. If he wanted to, he would have agreed originally. I think he probably feels that the war means that he stays in power, that it helps him to justify internal repression and to continue the vertical of power. He must be afraid not only of what the war is doing to the Russian economy, but what it does to his own power base. And a ceasefire might possibly decompose the internal discipline of the Russian army. Those may be his reasons, but the world expects him to end this bloody war.
Absolutely. What happens if there is no deal?
If there is no deal, then I expect movements in the US Congress. There's been a bill proposed by Senator Graham, which has received overwhelming support, almost 80 senators, which means the majority of Republican senators as well, which would impose punitive sanctions not only on the Russian Federation, but also secondary sanctions on all those who help Russia evade sanctions. And that would mean that we would be going back to the previous US policy, which is to put pressure on the aggressor in this war and not on the victim.
I would like to ask you about the role of the coalition of the willing. How exactly is it helping Ukraine? Because there are critics talking about the weakness of Europe. Do you still see a European peacekeeping mission, for example, or are there other options or maybe sanctions? What would you name as a real help for Ukraine and the influence?
Yeah, we talked about it in London. You know, we have this formula called Weimar Plus, which was originated in Warsaw, and it's Poland, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and the High Representative for Foreign and Defense Policy of the EU. And we had very productive talks in London yesterday. And the reassurance and mission is very much on the cards if we get the ceasefire.
How do you see the sanctions if there is no ceasefire, if Putin doesn't go to Istanbul, if there is no deal in the foreseeable future? What do you think the role of Europe should be, of the coalition and the allies of Ukraine, you know, the real influence in this situation?
My impression is that the United States, together with us, is giving President Putin one last chance on Thursday to do what the Americans call getting on the off-ramp from this war. And if President Putin doesn't use it, then we will redouble our efforts to, on the one hand, make the prosecution of this war harder for Russia and to help Ukraine.
Considering the complicated relations with the new American administration, would Europeans really think about creating your own army? Vladimir Zelensky has called for this in Munich on Munich Security Conference. I was there listening to him. You were there. So do you think that there is a prospect of creating European armed forces?
Careful with that term, because some people understand that to mean joining up national armies, and that won't happen. But what we could do, and in fact are doing already, is creating military capacities in addition at the EU level. There is a rapid reaction capacity in the form of a reinforced brigade being created right now. And we certainly should collaborate more in procurement, in research and development, and in building up our infrastructure for the sake of military mobility, so that the forces that we generate can actually move about the continent internally more quickly. We already collaborate within NATO. There are 10,000 NATO troops in Poland right now. Look, Europe on its own has a GDP 2.5 times bigger than Russia. Actually, even the defense budget. And we are on a peacetime footing, and Russia is on a wartime footing. Provided we collaborate and marshal our resources, Russia has no chance of winning.
Okay, and you know, Russia is, going back to the situation in Ukraine, to the war, Russia is very strict and unhappy with the idea of sending the military contingent of European allies in Ukraine. Do you still think that this is possible? Do you see it in a, foreseeable future?
Well, the whole point of this war is that it is Ukraine which should be deciding what foreign troops are invited into Ukraine, not Russia.
Of course.
Russia doesn't get a vote on this.
Yes, but I mean, are you doing this, Mr. Sikorski? Are you sending the after, and if they sign a ceasefire or any other kind of peaceful peace agreement, do you think that European forces are going to Ukraine right after that?
If it happens, it's because the words of Russian leadership and the treaties that Russia has signed are not credible. Remember, Ukraine already has Russian guarantees of independence and inviolability of borders in the Budapest Memorandum. There is also a treaty on the border between Russia and Ukraine, negotiated, signed, and ratified by Vladimir Putin. So Ukraine needs to be sure that if she makes any sacrifices, they are the last ones. So there are, and Russian guarantees of any peace deal are not credible for the reasons I've told you. So there are only two other alternatives, either NATO membership, which Russia objects to, or actual military presence in Ukraine without NATO membership. Ukraine will not be left at the mercy of Vladimir Putin again.
Last thing I wanted to discuss, breaking news. You have shut down the Russian consulate in Krakow, and Moscow is very unhappy about that. I have heard Maria Zakharova, the representative of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, saying that there was no Russian spies, there were no Russian spies in this general consulate, that maybe there were Ukrainians who actually were thinking about different kinds of bad things in Poland. How serious is the Russian presence of spies, in your opinion, in your country?
Well, first of all, a year ago, I shut down the Russian consulate in Poznan after the GRU paid someone to try to set fire to a paints factory in Wrocław. And I said at the time, if you do this sort of thing again and we catch you, I will close down another consulate. And we have caught Russian authorities. The GRU paid Ukrainian citizens to set fire to a huge shopping mall in Warsaw. And we have the evidence that this was commissioned by agents of the Russian Federation. So I'm doing what I said I would do. If you stop sending assassins and arsonists to Europe, you will not face the consequences. And it's Russia still retains one consulate in Gdańsk. We will not tolerate Russian hybrid warfare and Russian spying, because we don't do that kind of thing in Russia. And Russian authorities have to take this into account in their decision making.
But you have mentioned that Ukrainian citizens have actually done it. right? Is this a kind of a...
of the GRU, having been recruited by the GRU. So it is GRU and therefore Russia that is responsible.
Okay, and you have evidence, you're saying. So I suppose Maria Zakharova will see this interview and she will get back to you. She cannot leave it without an answer, as usual. Thank you so much, Mr. Sikorski. It is a pleasure.